you're studying A-level politics, I want you to think about what you actually did the last time you revised. Maybe you read through your textbook, you went back over your notes, maybe you made some flashcards, watched a few videos, highlighted a few things. But the question is, has any of that actually stuck? If I took all of that away from you right now and gave you a 30-mark essay question, could you answer it? Could you remember the examples? Could you come up with the right paragraphs? And could you reach a consistent judgment? Because that's what ultimately matters. For those who don't know me, my name's George. I was an A-star in politics when I sat the exam, and I now tutor the subject. And I think that gives me quite an interesting perspective on this. I've obviously been through the process myself and got the grade that most students watching this are probably aiming for, but I've spent a lot of time on the other side of it, seeing what core struggles most students have and what ways they're revising. In this year's exam series, the average grade jump of all my students was exactly 2, and none of them got below a B. And over time, I've started to notice the same problems coming up again and again. Students are putting the hours in, but they don't necessarily have a system that takes them from, I've been taught a topic, to, I can remember it, to, I can produce a good answer under time conditions. And those are completely different things. The other thing I've been increasingly interested in is the science of learning, because I want you to understand how and why some of these things work. So I've spent time looking at the neuroscience behind how students can focus better and remember more. And what's interesting is that quite a lot of what I've found lines up with what I've seen work in practice. Now, my expertise is A-level politics. So when we're talking about the science, I'll show you where these ideas are coming from, and then I'll show you how I actually think they're useful for an A-level politics student. And I want to do this in the right order. So we're going to build this from the foundations upwards. First, your environment, the habits and conditions that allow the highest performing students to focus and learn properly. Second, the learning, how to best learn the content in A-level politics and make sure you can recall it in the exam. Third, how to protect your attention. Here you'll find out what takes away from your learning. Fourth, how to apply this to A-level politics, what you should be focusing on, backed by what has worked for my students and what is supported by science. And lastly, what I call the extra things you could be doing outside of your revision to add that extra 10%. So let's start with the most important question. What do the highest performing students all have in common? First of all, they schedule consistent study time for each day. Now, the best students actually only study 3 to 4 hours a day, but it's what they do inside these sessions that actually matters. Successful students study alone to avoid distractions. They put their phones away and they inform others that they will be unavailable. And they maintain this regular routine. So this is usually about 5 days a week, and it entrains the brain to focus at a specific time. Now, in order to ensure that memory lasts longer, the best students actually teach others the content. Now, this might give a benefit to the counterpart that you're teaching to, but ultimately the most benefit's going to go to you. And this is actually quite a weird one. The high achievers often link their daily efforts to the longer term goal. So this could be about the careers you want to enter, maybe even providing for your family, having that financial freedom. But as long as you have a long-term goal in mind, it can push you through those daily sessions and that motivation. So just to recap, we want designated study blocks around 3 to 4 hours each day. Remove distractions, so phone, and don't be contactable during that time. We want to have that routinely, so each week studying at the same times, and we also want to be able to teach others the content. But how do you actually learn the content? Okay, so you're going to want to know about the testing effect, where the research comparing different study strategies, such as reading the content multiple times versus actually taking tests on it, proves that increasing number of self-tests leads to better exam performance. Even when learners feel less confident and struggle during this testing phase, the actual retention of information is significantly higher compared to when you're passively rereading. So to maximize the benefits of neuroplasticity, where your brain learns information, it's highly effective to self-test soon after the exposure to the material. So hopefully later that day. Studies indicate that this timing helps to inoculate the brain against forgetting, often reducing memory loss by approximately 50% compared to non-testing methods. So say you've had a lesson earlier in the day, as soon as you get home, say you spend 20-30 minutes actually learning the content again, testing yourself, that will keep the information in your brain 50% longer, so it's 100% worth it. The format does matter, so open-ended and short test self-answers are superior to the multiple choice ones, and because you're obviously needing to retrieve that information much more deeply when you don't get a multiple choice. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman recommends what's called the gap effect, which involves taking brief periodic pauses, so maybe 5-10 seconds, during or immediately after these learning bouts. Now, these pauses allow your hippocampus to repeat the new information at a high rate, similar to what occurs actually during sleep, which significantly boosts retention. Now, I wanted to talk a bit about flow state. Most people idealize flow state, but it's actually not what is conducive to learning. Flow is defined as the maximal expression of a skill you have already mastered, but learning by contrast requires you to push beyond your current capabilities into an unfamiliar territory. So that's why friction's good. Effective learning is inherently messy and often frustrating. It requires focused effort, making mistakes, and dealing with limbic friction. And none of this is what you experience during flow. Instead, you actually go for what's called a clutch state, where you struggle. Unlike flow, a clutch state involves active, challenging work where you're highly focused but still feel the effort of the task. This state is more conducive to building capacity because it focuses your brain to struggle, which is a necessary component of the neuroplastic process. This is just basically to say that your revision should not be easy. You shouldn't feel like you've done loads and loads and you've remembered everything, you've absorbed everything, because in most cases that's just not going to happen. But what stops learning from happening properly? Well, a bad night's sleep. Andrew Huberman emphasises that sleep is the most critical tool for studying and learning, functioning as the best nootropic, so the smart drug, available. Here's how it impacts your learning. So while the act of focusing on material during your study session initiates the learning process, the actual physical reordering and strengthening of neural connections occur during sleep. And you've also got this thing called the first night effect, where information learned during the day is primarily consolidated in your neural circuits during the sleep that follows the same night. So prioritising high quality sleep immediately after a study session is vital for long-term retention. And I talked earlier about the gap effect, where you give yourself a short pause after learning. Well, walking out of class or finishing a revision session and just instantly checking your phone interrupts these critical biological gap windows and prevents memory consolidation. Ideally, you actually be able to test yourself briefly when you get outside your classroom. Then we have the brain drain effect. Even when a phone is turned off, placed face down or kept in a bag, the brain remains subconsciously waiting for the notifications or updates, which consumes attentional resources. So that links back to the study habits that we were talking about earlier with the successful students where they kept the phone outside the room. Now, how do we apply this to A-level politics? So you know the best study habits, how to optimize your learning and how to consolidate that learning. Now you need to know how to apply this to A-level politics. The most important part of learning content for politics is going to be the examples, and not just the ones you get taught in class. If you're aiming for an A or A star, you're going to have to do more. Not just learning the recent examples, at least for the majority of topics anyway, but the ones that students won't have, because that makes you stand out. And I recommend creating a flashcard bank as early as possible and make sure you're setting aside consistent time to practice these, especially ramping up to the exam. People say that doesn't help them understand the content, but if you can understand the examples, in most cases you can understand the content behind it. The reason I say to address the examples, especially if you're short on time, is because there's so much content in A-level politics, and ultimately too much waffle to actually get through the revision. Revise what matters. Once you think you've got that down, you can start applying this to essay plans, but ideally not any type of essay plans. You want to plan what is most likely to come up. Anything else is noise. This year, I was able to predict all but one question that came up in the exams for students. And when you have a detailed essay plan for those questions, it helps a lot. A step further could be memorising prepared and strong counterpoints for those most likely questions. But that's only if you want level 5 answers. As I said before, always take the opportunity to teach someone content. If you're ever worried about how that can give them an unfair advantage, it might, but most importantly, you're consolidating your own knowledge. But really, as you probably know, understanding the content means nothing without having a solid essay structure. Trust me, I've seen this firsthand. Structure is the thing that can unlock the biggest grade jumps. I would probably spend 5 to 10 hours researching and finding out what is the best essay structure and just copying it. From then, hand in as many essays as you can. Get your teachers to give you as much feedback as possible and improve on that feedback. And then lastly, what can you do outside of revision to get that extra 10%? Dr. Huberman highly recommends mindfulness meditation as a zero-cost tool to improve focus, attention and memory, which are all critical for effective studying. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of NSDRs, non-sleep deep rest. They are very, very powerful. So they're usually about 10 to 20 minutes and it really allows you to rest and recover in order to not just consolidate learning, but also re-energize for those next revision sessions. Dr. Wood discusses how different intensities of aerobic exercise serves as different stimuli for the brain health. So if you're not exercising, you probably should be, maybe zone 2 cardio. Both zone 2 and high intensity interval training provide significant benefits, though they interact with the brain structure different ways. So zone 2 cardio, characterised as moderate, steady state activities and maybe even brisk walking, has shown to support overall brain volume and function. So if you do this consistently, maybe 30 minutes 3 times a week, it can lead to increased volume of the hippocampus, which improves memory. Now, there was a high intensity study as well for the 4x4 Norwegian protocol. So this was 4-minute intervals at 85 to 95% of the maximum heart rate, separated by 3-minute rest periods. And this was performed 3 times a week for 6 months. And they found that while their fitness improved similar to a zone 2 group, they demonstrated superior results in other areas. Most importantly, that's greater hippocampal function, which were maintained 5 years after the 6-month period and obviously are going to contribute to improvements in memory. So just to recap, we want to sleep well, we want to ideally exercise well. Not included in this is also hydrating, eating well, eating whole foods, eating organically. It all adds up. So hopefully this video has helped. Hopefully you know how to revise now, what you should be addressing in regards to A-level politics, a bit about how the brain works, and some extra protocols you can be including to really give you that edge in regards to exam performance. If you like this video, you can subscribe and also follow my Instagram. I'll leave it in the description as well. Best of luck with your exams.